Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
I'm Dr. Harry Toder, head of the Criminal Justice Department here at St. Catharine, and we're privileged to have Dr. Gloria Nixon-John here as our guest speaker this morning.
Can you use the mic?
Try.
It's on.
Okay. And this event is also co-sponsored by the Dominican Sisters of Peace, with Sister Judy Morris, Justice Promoter within the Dominican Sisters. And just to tell you a little bit about Dr. Nixon-John, she has a PhD from Michigan State University.
Go Sparties.
Spartan. And she has been a writer and a teacher for a number of years, and she also has a great deal of passion for justice issues in general. For example, in the school system, she worked with children who she did not feel received the attention that she should have received, and she has been involved in numerous other causes in addition to that. And before I turn the floor over to Dr. Nixon-John, I would like to ask Sister Mary Louise Edwards to offer us a prayer.
Okay. Thank you, Harry. Would you bow your heads, please? Kind and gracious God, we come before you as a community of faith, as a community of servants, and we ask your blessing on this, our time of conversation and listening. We ask you to give wisdom to each of us as we strengthen the ways that we build our consciences, as we come to terms with some of life's most challenging issues. And we pray always for those who are in need of our prayers, and we pray especially for all those who today are incarcerated for unjust reasons, those who are on death row and have no hope. And we pray that at this time we may allow ourselves to be open to all of our brothers and sisters who are affected by the criminal justice system, and ways that we can be advocates for justice in this world. And we ask all of this in the name of our brother Jesus. Amen.
Amen. Just a couple of housekeeping matters before I turn the floor over. Dr. Disponette, she wishes any of her students that have not signed in yet to do so. And then after the session, if any students in my class can please see me, my 11 o'clock class, so that I can get you down for attendance. So, without any further delay,
Thank
Dr.
you.
Nixon.
I could talk to you today about Michigan State University basketball. Or I could talk to you about my horses since I'm in Kentucky. I live on a small horse farm in Michigan, of all places. Instead, I'm called here today to talk to you about a pretty dark and sad story. This hasn't been an easy story to tell, and it hasn't been an easy story. It hasn't been received well in all communities, as you probably can imagine. Some turn away from my story, and I thought about doing so myself because a child was a victim of a brutal crime. I had to write the story because 2 children were victims. Todd Ice was 15 years old when he killed his young neighbor. I don't excuse his crime, but I also do not excuse his community, a community that ignored Todd's plight. I've named him Ted in this work, but it's very obvious that this is about a crime that took place in 1978 in Powell County, Kentucky. If you go back and look at the newspaper articles, you'll understand the vehemence in that community. And when I use the word community, by the way, I include myself. And by community, I mean everyone failed both of these children. Family failed, that first community. Churches failed, neighbors failed, social service agencies, the criminal justice system, everyone failed. There have been several cases in the news lately about, actually, if you wait long enough, there'll be another one, about young children, and particularly teens and young men who commit murder. When I hear about those crimes, I don't think, even though CNN wants me to, these are monsters, an aberration. We need to lock them up quickly, punish them, kill them. What I think instead is, how did these children that someone loved, become killers right under our eyes, our eyes? How did they get and have access to weapons that they used? Why didn't they know? Why didn't we know that they were at a point where they could kill? What might have stopped them? My book is not really about the death penalty. People like to get me into that area to talk about it, and I think my feelings about it are kind of obvious. But that's not what I want to talk about. What I want to talk about is my research, what I learned from this crime, and how I can disseminate the information I have in my research. And hopefully we can all go out and make sure that things like this don't happen to the best of our ability. Something can go terribly wrong in every village. You know, sometimes I talk to adults, audiences, and I say, you don't think criminal justice system is going to impact your life. You think it has nothing to do with you and the people you love. Everyone you know is way above all that. And sure enough, little by little, they share their stories. It might be a niece or a nephew. It might be an aunt or an uncle. But somewhere, almost in every family, if you look hard enough, you'll find someone who was impacted, served, or disserved by the criminal justice system in America. I'd like to start, however, and I will answer your questions later. I'd love to answer questions. I'm going to start, however, by doing a few readings from the book. I wrote the book as based on a true story. I wrote it as fiction because, well, I'm a fiction writer and a poet to begin with. I studied, my master's degrees in journalism, but my PhD's in English and literature. And so as a writer, I wanted to create and paint the scenes. However, the research I did was 7 years worth of mostly interviews, diaries, first-hand accounts, and I interviewed people on both sides of what they thought should have been done to the young man who committed this crime. So, and I went to the site of the crime, the community. I went into those churches during services. So that's why I was able to paint the pictures that I paint. It isn't just something I made up. This is the very beginning of the book. My publisher took the first few pages away and started here, and I think it was a smart move on her behalf. Even in the dark, he knew the land, praised the gullies and rocky plateaus, the modest footpaths for their solitude. He knew the craggy jutting of the hills, the stoic black locust pointing upward to a place of promise, away from the misery in the hollows below. He was so attuned to this land that his footfalls became a rhythm to which the other creatures sang along in clicks and caws. He knew the name of all things up on the mountain, knew the birds by their calls, and the trees by silhouette, no matter the season. Sometimes he walked as a scientist, cataloging what he found, what he saw. Sometimes he was a pilgrim, foraging along an otherwise untrodden path. This was his peaceful place, the only place he could be alone, the only place far enough away from his mother. But in the past few days, Ted had been watched, no denying that. He had been watched by a bearded man lurking behind trees and rocks. But since the man never came forward, never approached him, he had convinced himself that the sighting was perhaps a mirage, a trick of shadows and light, simply a cluster of gray, shape-shifting clouds. He comforted himself with the notion of illusion. Then suddenly the Bigfoot of a man is on him, pinning him to the ground, wielding a knife. As they tumble together on the damp ground, it becomes difficult for Ted to see where his own arms end and the muscled arms of the massive man began. The blade on the bearded man's knife is thin like the blade on his own knife, but Ted knows that thin doesn't count for much. His father had taught him that it is the contour and attenuation that makes a knife dangerous. He knows that the carved point can easily slice through skin, penetrate past flesh and muscle into the deep beet red organs. He imagined his own entrails hanging like a string of sausage in the bearded man's shed, and considers screaming for help, but that would be futile. He has come to this place to be alone, and now he is alone with the bearded man. Small and thin for 15, Ted is surprisingly strong from years of hauling water, years of using the pitchfork and shovel to clean stalls, from wielding a pickaxe to remove rocks for spring planting. He knows his strength, knows to push harder and harder still, but the man just grunts against his effort, pushes back with even more savage determination. The heavy hopelessness that Ted carries around with him down in the hollows makes him consider giving up. He could die at the hands of the bearded man. He knows. Instead, he allows the gears of his fear and rage to ratchet up toward a place of deeper resolve, the place where instinct takes over, instinct that comes from eons of land and sea creatures who, when facing a larger captor, use agility and raw will to break free, to crawl under rocks, skitter off into a hole. Spitting into the man's glowing eyes, wiggling frenetically, as if possessed by demons himself, he breaks free, rolls over a sharp ledge of rock, then down a muddy slope. He gets to his feet and runs, runs, runs. This is the beginning of the delusion that this young man was suffering. And all through the book, I traced his main delusion, which was the bearded man. At one point in his letters, and even in some of his poetry, he talks about the bearded man. And at one point, he has a catharsis at the end of the book about the bearded man committing the crime that he was accused of committing. You know, when I first started doing the research, being the optimist that I am, I wanted to think he never did commit the crime. And so I did research about the year 1978 in that particular area of Kentucky to see what else was going on. A couple of other things were going on. One of them was there were Bigfoot sightings that happen everywhere, but there were a lot of them in that year in that area of Kentucky. So I thought, oh my goodness, maybe that's where I should take this book. So there were a lot of things going on, but I wanted to believe that he was someone who could not commit the crime, probably because I worked with such young teens myself. And I worked with a lot of teens that other people thought were throwaways when I was teaching high school, and I wanted to believe that he couldn't commit the crime. Next, I'm just going to read the recommendations of the psychologist. By the way, my co-author is Skip Nolker, who brought me this story, handed me all his files, and he said, I can't write, will you write this? And he was the psychologist that first saw Ted when he committed the crime, after he committed the crime and was locked up. And he made the following recommendations. Now we know instead Todd ended up on death row with adults. By the time he got there, he was 16. He was in the maximum security prison pictured here in Eddyville, Kentucky. I visited many times, and I visited the death row area and have friends there now. But the psychologist, he suggested that this is what should have been done at that time, right after the crime. The recommendations are, number one, placement in a residential treatment facility which has the capacity to treat schizophrenia. This would be a mental health facility of some type which has the capacity to use psychotropic drugs as part of treatment. 2, long-term intensive psychotherapy. 3, Future release of him must be carefully considered to assure safety of the community into which he is released. And it goes on. Along with being schizophrenic with delusions, this young man was being starved. If you've read the book, you know. His mother was starving him. And a lot of the breaking in that he was doing was really foraging for food. The day on the crime, he was in a neighbor's trailer foraging for food, and they came back home to pick something up they had forgotten. And he was kind of trapped in their kitchen, and that's when this horrible incident occurred. His mother was also, and I have social service records, the book, every other chapter is documentation. And the only thing changed in the documentation are the names. These are actual documented court records, social service agency records, and church documents and so forth. But she was, not only was she starving him, the state of Kentucky was allowing her to adopt other children. At one point, she had 8 children in the house. The last was a young Korean boy, and I do talk about him in the book. And she took him, his first month with this family, to a little diner in the town near where they lived. She sat and ate a hamburger and french fries, gave him the crust, and a little bit of her Coke. And the reason this is documented so thoroughly is social services, after the fact, went in and tried to remove. They had removed one child before, but that was only because it was a young girl who wouldn't stay there. And so there was careful documentation about what people were saying that she was doing, the mother was doing. The father was basically absent. He was there but never intervened. He never really took that much of an interest. I think I'll read, there were 2 trials. The first trial was in a small community, and it really just became a circus atmosphere. School teachers brought elementary school children to this trial, which I find a little strange, where they talked about the crime. There were guns in the courtroom, and at one point, gunfire. There's someone online who's disputing that occurred when they respond to my book, but I have police documentation of the things that happened in the trial. Well, all that went on, and then he was whisked off to the penitentiary here. Can you imagine? Now, mind you, his schizophrenic state makes him so that he thinks, one minute he's thinking, oh, this is wonderful what's happening to me. And the next minute, he's horrified and cowering in a corner. So he's in the back of the police car. The sheriff, they're finally taking him to his new home in Eddyville. Has anyone ever been there? It's a beautiful setting. There's Eddyville Lakes there. And the penitentiary was built by Italian stonemasons in the 1800s. And it's a massive structure, and it's beautiful to look at. It's pretty scary to walk inside, and I had the grand tour along with several visits. One day I was there when they were bringing a young man in chains, and they had just shaved his head. And I'll never forget the look on his face and the look in his eyes when I tried to smile at him. I wanted to hug him, really, but he was being processed. And he didn't look that much older than the young man I'm writing about. Here's the second reading I'm going to do today. I've changed the names of the counties, but the map in front will show you exactly what I'm talking about, and it's easy to look up this case. I changed the names because I was getting some death threats. I had started out to write this purely as nonfiction, but also writing a narrative gave me some liberty in terms of using the language I wanted to use to create the mood that I as a writer had in writing the story. So here he is, off to the big house, the big house. The drive from Fox County to Lakeville is several hours of scenic parkway through natural forest interrupted here and there. With the patches left from surface mining. Once off the parkway and on through Fredonia, clusters of prefabs and trailer homes sit just off the road. Some rusted over, others neat with whirligig lawn ornaments and handmade Halloween decorations taped to windows and doors. They pass a small horse farm, then a small square plot of cemetery, so old that the headstones are worn down to thumb-shaped, nameless pillars. Then the land under them rises up to a scenic plateau, curves around and down into a breathtaking view of the massive limestone penitentiary on the lip of a lake. The sheer size of the place, the turreted facade, the elongated arched windows, sweeping steps up to its many doors diminished the surrounding structures, including the whitewashed antebellum mansion on the adjacent hill. To Ted, the place is stunning. It is indeed a castle, a fortress, and perhaps he will be safe here, finally safe from the bearded man. He turns his attention to the lake, watches as the autumn wind remakes and the lake into mirrored shards. For a moment he sees clear to the bottom of the lake, thinks he sees sidewalks, roads, a plat laid out for development, people walking about unaware that the lake will soon freeze over, become an icy tomb. That's what he sees is just a trick. He instinctively tries to raise his hand to his face so that he can rub his eyes, but his hands shackled to his leather waistband spring back down as if they are being controlled by someone else. The penitentiary is reflected in the turbulent lake as well, and it appears as if there are two of them, two of the most ornate and imposing structures he has ever seen. Are there water scorpions in the lake? Dragonflies? For sure. Once near a pond back home, he saw a dragonfly fill its funnel-shaped posterior with water, watched in amazement as she spit a tiny stream of water like a minuscule spout, then turned around and spit in the other direction, moving forward a step or two and repeating the process again and again in a little dance of turns and spouts. I want to stop for a minute. He was a bug expert, by the way, and had won many awards in the state of Kentucky for his collection. So in order to write through his eyes, I really had to become familiar with trees and bugs and plants in this area of the United States, but in particular bugs. And I found some wonderful books, a lot of them in French, about bugs. The other thing I want to tell you is he's looking down into the lake and thinking he sees a town, and there used to be a town there. It was flooded over and turned into a lake, but on a real clear day, there are still remnants of the structure of the street, the plat of the street. Once they are at street level to the castle, Ted looks up at it. The windows are ablaze from the reflected sun. He wants to see inside. On the drive, Riley told him that inmates have written home to tell loved ones about the strength of the place, said that even when tornadoes blow through the area, penitentiary, only the massive water tower gives a bit in the wind, creaks like an angry old hag. Ted stumbles in his leg irons as they begin their walk up the three-tiered ceremonial steps that lead to the front door of the penitentiary. Officer Cotton gets a grip on Ted's left arm and Riley takes the other. Together they lift him onto each step. As if Ted isn't there, Riley tells Cotton that the boy body's body feels like a sick foal he once found in his shed. While still alive, the foal was all jutted bone and feather light until death and rigor mortis had made it heavy as stone. Cotton reaches over with his free hand, moves it up and down, and the boy's forearm in a soothing gesture, trying to comfort him. At the very top of the stairs, Riley stops abruptly, forced all three of them to stumble, nearly topple backwards. Riley points to the words above the carved stone, above the threshold of the prison, and it reads, "Abandon all hope, ye that enter here," and adds in a bravado that suggests a sinister triumph, "Got that, boy?" Ted looks Riley in the eyes and says, "Dante," he says. And again, "Dante." But the sense of his words fly over the heads of the two officers, higher still, above the turrets, above the smokestacks, the guard towers, up and up to where the rolling clouds mock the intent of barbed-wired assurances. All along in the book also, I have poems and letters that Ted wrote while he was incarcerated. And no, he did not die, was not executed at that penitentiary. In the second trial, he was released into a mental institution. The two attorneys that handled the second trial are pretty famous attorneys in this state. I've gotten to know them as well. One of them is now deceased, Gail Robinson and Kevin McNally. You might have heard their names. But what happened is they sent him into a mental health facility where he was doing very well there, but he should have remained there. So I'm not saying that he should have just been thrown out the front door of the prison. What happened then, somehow, the attorneys had to try to have him kept there. They petitioned the state to have him kept in the mental institution. But instead, the state chose, after all this money they sent to send him to death row and possibly kill him, they spent more money to get him out of the mental health facility and into a group home. He died in the group home in 2010 from a heart attack, probably because he was on a lot of psychotropic drugs, but he was also morbidly obese. He had been starved as a child, remember? So he was eating everything he could get his hands on. Every time I do this talk, I do it differently because there are little things I see in the audience, little flashes of concern or doubt, or so I do really want to answer your questions, and you can have at it when I'm ready to do that. But I do want to talk about some of the things I discovered. I have a bibliography that I have here, but I also have copies on my table that you're welcome to take. And it'll look like an old bibliography to you because it is old. It's the bibliography, some of the resources I looked at when I was doing the preliminary research and all of the interviewing and everything. And I went to sources that were academic and general, just so I could get a good feel of what was going on. And that helped educate me, and I'm not a psychologist and I'm not an attorney, so there was a lot of educating to be done, and there's still gaps in my knowledge in these fields. But I don't stop studying it. It's become a passion for me. I was able to put together kind of a template or a list, a worrisome list of what to look for to try to prevent someone who is mentally unstable from going off with a gun or a knife into a school. We hear about college shootings all the time. Going into a church, a school, or somewhere and just letting go. So I started with these two quotes. I like this Hillary Rodham Clinton quote because, again, she reminds us that we're here to raise up and protect our children and to keep an eye out for them. And a lot of you are studying psychology and you're interested in social service work. And so to some of you, I'm preaching to the choir. Others, I'm sure in the audience, think, well, yeah, he did something horrible, lock him away and forget about him. Personally, I can't do that. And the more research I did, here are some of my resources. I'm going to skim over them. Again, most of the research I did was what I call qualitative research, which means you go to the source. You interview people involved, and I talked to the inmates that were on death row with him. The very interesting thing to me, this is another thread I could have taken somewhere else. The very first time this young man had anyone who really showed concern and love for him, learned how to share with him, gave him understanding and compassion was, and I bet you can guess, on death row. He was like the child there that people were taking care of. If he needed something, someone had a little bit of money, and I'm not saying that was the best influence in the world. I'm just saying, finally, he found some love. One of the men that became his close friend was a real serious psychopath who's still alive, who doesn't like the fact that I wrote this book. I wish I could share some of the notes I got from him, but I can't. But what I did do, how do I get to this next one? Wi-Fi, where do I find it? See, all of your technology help here, and here it is. Remember, I'm a grandmother. This is not easy for me. One other thing I want to mention where my research is going right now is I'm researching what happens to the brain and therefore behavior when someone is deprived of food. The serotonin levels that change and all the things that happen and how for most people you become more aggressive. And even if you've ever been a little bit hungry, if you've ever fasted for anything, my husband gives up sugar for Lent, anything sweet for Lent. And by day 2, he's miserable. He's hard to get along with, and I just tell him, go have a candy bar. But when I'm starting to, and this was something that just, I don't know why I didn't look at it before, that's what happens in research. All of a sudden I'm thinking, wait a minute, there's got to be some more evidence about how being deprived of food affected behavior too, because we had a young man who was on the A track. He was doing extremely well in school, he was winning awards, but he was at that age where you begin to see signs of schizophrenia, where you begin to see mental problems. Had he been put on medication and observed and maybe treated like a human being instead of starved, I believe we wouldn't be here talking about this today. But I did, whenever I hear about these cases on the news and they say, oh, he was bullied, that's why he did it. And then the other channel will say, he has a history of mental illness. Okay, I get that. But I was able to put this together. And in most cases, and there are a couple in Michigan right now that are worth looking at. Michigan right now is fighting a lot of the juvenile sentencing to adult prisons because certain people believe that when a 13 or 14-year-old is picked up by the police, they don't understand their Miranda rights. They don't understand that they need to get an attorney. Everyone should understand that. Because I believe you don't have to be the kind of criminal that the young man I'm talking about is. But I really believe that you can walk down the wrong street and end up incarcerated. I really believe that you could get in an automobile accident that wasn't your fault but perceived as your fault and end up at least being charged with manslaughter. And I know of cases like that. But let's look at my list. And as you look at this list, and I have copies on the table so you can take it with you. Now I want you to remember today, and I want you to go out into the world, and if you see someone who even you think has 2 or 3 of these things going on, talk to that person, talk to someone. First and foremost, a family history of mental illness. That was evident in his files. Physical or emotional abuse. One day his mother would tell him he was a wonderful young man and the bug collection was great and she was proud of him. The next day she was calling him sick for collecting bugs and slapping him across the face for it. When young children don't know when they're going to be rewarded or punished, you probably know kids are like that. You might have been in a family like that yourself. That you don't know, either your aggression goes somewhere else
to combat the person you can't fight, or you crawl into yourself. Number 8, a triggering event. This is really important. Sometimes it's just a father walks out. Someone has all this going on and they're okay, they're surviving all right. And then there's a triggering event. In his life, Ted or Todd, his grandmother died. And when she was in the house, she was sweet to him. She didn't do anything miraculous, didn't buy him anything. She's just kind to him. The other nice thing that would happen is when Grandma came to stay, the neighbor would come over and bring gravy and biscuits. And there was food in the house, finally. When Grandma died, the love stopped, and so did the gravy and biscuits. You know, that I think. And then, along with the triggering event, the loss, he was in that trailer, caught with a hunting knife. There was a gun in that house, but he couldn't find bullets. He tried to. I don't know what else he would have done. An hour and a half after the incident, I sincerely believe he forgot it. Didn't know he did it. The mother survived and identified him. And strangely enough, this is another direction I could have taken the book. Someone else confessed to the crime. Someone else confessed to being there. Someone else who I have found online, who's not doing well, by the way, having some issues. Said he was there, but then his mother said he was with her all day. Skipped school, said he was with Todd that day in the trailer. Nobody wanted to believe his confession. I really don't know if he was there. I could change the ending and put him there. I have my doubts that Todd was alone because of some of the other things. When I looked at the crime scene carefully, there were some other things there that made me think there was more than one person in that house committing that crime. There were certainly different sized footprints in the blood, not of a woman or a child, bigger than that. So, cold case, I wish it was. Go back and look at it again. And then the last fact here, children who commit violent crimes have been victimized by violent adults. Keep your eyes open. I saw a woman one day slap her child across the face in a shopping cart. Boom, boom. Don't ask for anything again. I waited and got her. I went out to the parking lot to get her license plate number. It may have just been a slip. She may have not done it ever again or before. But I wanted to know, and you have to be that kind of a nosy person if you want to make a difference. I believe that. A recent study of 200 serious juveniles offenders found that over 90% of them had suffered childhood trauma, abuse by the hands of an adult. 74% of them had been physically, sexually, and or emotionally abused, and over 30% had lost a significant person in their life to whom they were emotionally attached. So you kind of have the formula. Take it out into the world with you and be aware. I do have copies of my book available today for purchase. The proceeds of which are going to go to the Coalition Against the Death Penalty. In Kentucky, since the last 3 executions in Kentucky were Harold McQueen in 97, Edward Lee Harper in 99, and Marco Allen Chapman in 2008. Right now I think there are 13 men serving on death row in Kentucky. Most of the executions in America happen in, guess where? Texas. Oklahoma's another one. I didn't really think I needed to look there, but I have a lot of statistics and I've done a lot of research on juveniles. What sometimes happens is a juvenile who commits what is called a capital offense, will go to a juvenile facility. They'll stay there until they're old enough to be transferred to an adult facility. And once they're in an adult facility, they're then put on death row. So even though the crime was committed at 15 or 14, they go on and end up, actually until as late as the 1980s, there were executions. I have a list here if anyone's interested. I said I wasn't going to go into that direction, the death penalty direction. But my research really has taken me there. Anyway, I want to stop there because I'm tired of hearing my own voice. And ask you if you have any questions.
This two-part question. One is, can you pinpoint just for the audience, the exact crime, what exactly took
He did.
place? And then secondly, can you talk about the relationship between the environment, such as abuse, and the mental illness? I mean, the approximate weight or proportion of importance in each case?
Okay, first, the crime. I hate to relive it, but I will. After being out in the woods, and that was the passage I read, after being out in the woods for a few hours, the record shows that he went into his neighbor's trailer looking for food. He didn't go to school that day. He got high instead. So he got high, he went into the woods, he had his hunting knife. He then went into the neighbor's trailer thinking that they were gone for the day because they usually left at a certain time. And this was right next door. A woman and her young child came back home to pick up some laundry and found him in their kitchen, and he went crazy. He tied the mother to the bed and stabbed her. And when looking for the child, found her in the bathtub and screamed that the bearded man was in there and was after her and after the mother and after, at least that's what the documentation says, and stabbed the child. The police found the child in the bathtub. And I know some of you are thinking, I know what you're thinking. Good, he deserved to die. I know you're thinking that. Try to remember what I'm saying to you. There are two victims. And the second question, Harry, was?
The relative importance of environment and mental illness.
Right, well, he lived in a place where really there wasn't, social services in that area of Kentucky in 1978 had their hands full just providing basic necessities. So they weren't really looking for how they could help the emotional stability of this young man. Classmates of his have contacted me and have been very nasty in their comments. One of them said, well, he played football, he was a strong kid. I know he was strong. He still was being starved. School teachers said, yeah, I thought he was coming to school high, but that wasn't a big problem for me. He started to get really strange, and I saw him talking to himself sometime, but what am I going to do about it? His mother won't listen, and there's this roadblock to providing psychological help in some communities, in every state, in my state as well, where if you were to tell a parent, he was a juvenile, no one could go into the home and force mother to do certain things. She had the final say. There was one social worker who said, I really think he should be seen, and she said, well, if you want to come here, that's okay, but he ain't going nowhere. So there's a problem of getting him to where he needed to be, this roadblock, and even in educated families, a lot of people, the last resort is psychiatry and psychology. That's the last resort. My husband even, if you said something to him like, I think you need to talk to a counselor because you're a workaholic, he would never agree to that because in his family, that's a sign of weakness. And besides that, the church can fix everything. the black community in Detroit, a lot of times when there are social action groups forming to get something done, they only turn to the church. It's good to turn to the church, but you need other professionals with the help of that religious community to intervene. So there are all those, you know, the deprivation, poverty, ignorance, and you know, I grew up relatively poor. We talked about that last night. So I know what it's like to not have a lot. However, I had loving parents who, with the little bit they had, made me think I was loved and that I had a lot. My mother could cook a wonderful meal out of nothing. In fact, sometimes on the way home from school, I prayed that she had pasta fasul, which is pasta and beans, because when she made it, it was the most wonderful meal. But there are communities all over this country where everyone, you know, I call them throwaway communities. It angers me, and it also makes me very sad. And I don't know how to fix it. I guess talking about it and asking one person at a time, one audience at a time, to try to be aware and do what you can. I know a lot of you are in fields that are going to go right into this. Working with families. Don't take no for an answer. If you see a problem, go forward. Be insistent. That would have been my other career, I think, psychology or social work. Other questions? Judy?
Can you comment on the judicial system at that time? You had 2 judges, 2 different trials, the weaknesses, the strengths, whatever. And also, the killing jar is an unusual title. Why did you choose that?
Good question. The criminal justice system. The first trial was in the very community where he committed the crime. It was more like a mass hanging meeting. All of the psychologists, any of the people who were witnesses for the defense were threatened, some shot at. It was a circus environment, and the judge lived in the community and wanted to get reelected and wasn't listening to much of anything. The second trial was moved, and these 2 incredible attorneys, who would cost most people a whole lot of money if they didn't work for the public defender's office, came in and decided that they were going to handle this case. They actually got very close. The young man who committed the crime, is, you probably know by now, is Todd Ice. Isn't that a chilling name? That was my first title. Instead, I changed it because I was getting so many death threats that when I could relate it to so many people directly to the crime. The killing jar, I don't really think it was, it's an interesting title, but other people have used it, and my publisher decided on it. But metaphorically speaking, the killing jar is the jar that bug collectors use to stun their bugs and then to kill them before they pin them on the boards. And he was collecting bugs, and when I was describing it to my publisher, it's almost like he became one of those. He got caught in this jar, and the jar was the jar that contained everything wrong with his community, and the criminal justice system is in that jar. That you could look at it that way, like that killing jar influence is what caused this crime, along with the brutal act that was committed. Can I answer that, Judy? Okay. But in terms of exactly what went on in the trial, I actually have documentation at the second trial, and I have some from the first trial too, where this is lifted right off the record, where his mother is sitting in the courtroom. A neighbor testifies about the food situation in the home, and that's included in the book too.
What factors are different at that time when that was being held, like those cases were being handled versus, the most recent being that of this young man who ran over from Texas who, you know, maimed several lives, and he was under the influence of drugs and alcohol. I mean, how would two courts of law deem that different from what had happened to Ted?
That's a wonderful question. And you know, I'm married to a defense attorney, by the way. And when we saw that on TV, we had a lively discussion about it. First of all, I was shocked at the man who ran down those people. I was shocked that, this is going to sound very callous, but I was shocked that they have a capital, they're charging him with a capital offense. Did you know that?
Well, they said that he only did maybe under 10 years of probation, basically.
But when they first cited that incident, they said they were going to charge him with a capital case. It'll be interesting to watch that. You know, in a lot of ways, we haven't changed since 1978. I think it depends on, this is the perpetrator who committed the crime. As you know, we're getting into the social discussion here. Who committed the crime, what state you're in, who you can afford to defend you. I think those are very important factors when a crime is committed. I don't know how I feel about the man who, under the influence of alcohol, I don't feel he should be, I don't feel like he should be locked up for life and or executed. But I'm not quite sure what the punishments would be. I don't think we've changed all that much in most states in this country still. The only difference between 78 and now is maybe the technology and the music we listen to. But a lot of it is still, we're still real quick to lock up, kill, not excuse, until it's someone in our own family, in our own heart. Other questions? Yes.
Did you ever meet Ted or anyone in his family?
I met people in his family. I saw him interviewed, but there was a partition, a glass partition between us, and he didn't know I was watching an interview. And I did that, some of my background is in journalism. My master's degree is in journalism before I went on to my PhD. I wanted to remain distant from the subject. I didn't want to look at his white, beautiful white face, pearly white actually, close up, his curly black hair and his soft eyes, because I'm too much of a softie. I wanted to try to keep some distance. I didn't keep as much maybe as I should have. But I did watch interviews. And then there was on one of the TV stations, there was an interview of him too. 60 Minutes, I think, that did an interview. I have a copy somewhere, and I think it's 60 Minutes. But I did interview family. I interviewed the men who served with him. I interviewed neighbors, people in the church, social workers, a librarian, teachers. I wanted to see what he was checking out of the library. And she wouldn't tell me exactly, but she told me a lot of research on insects. When he was able to get to a library, I think they had a bookmobile there. Yes?
Did you interview the mother?
No, I didn't. She probably wouldn't agree.
Is she still alive?
Yes, she is still alive. You can find her online. And she is, you know, I get trashed for saying this, but if I were going to point my finger at somebody who was most instrumental in moving this whole thing, this horrible event forward, it was this woman who was getting money to care for children, some not even her own, that she wasn't caring for.
Yes.
Anything further about the man with the beard? Do they know who he was or?
Well, it was just his delusion, but he saw it everywhere. One of the judges had a beard. And there was someone else in the court once that walked in with a beard. Whenever he saw a beard that was big enough, he just went into this delusional state and near the end just curled up in a ball and shook. You've been a wonderful audience. I want to thank you for coming today. I'm being treated very well while I'm here on your campus, and I appreciate that so much. I do want to apologize that I'm wearing my jeans and the clothes I had on 2 days ago. My luggage is somewhere over New York right now. And I'm going to Western Kentucky University from here, and they may see me in the same outfit. I usually at least get a little better dressed up. So I'm apologizing for my attire. Thank you.
I believe Sister Judy wants to say a few closing words. Thank you very much.
On behalf of the Dominican Sisters and Associates of Peace, I want to express our heartfelt gratitude, not only for your being here, but for writing the book. It's as they would say, a page turner. I just finished it recently, and it captivates you every step of the way. So thank you very much, and I was appreciative of the opportunity to have you here. I knew you said you were going to be at Western Kentucky University, and I said, why not here? So thank you for taking the time to come. I hope your luggage arrives. Anybody have toothpaste or toothbrush anywhere in the audience? And please come forward if you'd like a copy of the book, be signed. And the proceeds again go to the Kentucky Coalition to Abolish the Death Penalty. Thank you.